welcome to Cover Story. Today we are in conversation with Lobsang Sangye. He is the former president of the Central Tibetan Administration, and he's also the political heir to the His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Lobsang has been a Fulbright scholar at Harvard. He's done a thesis on Buddhism and human rights. He's an expert on Sino-Tibetan relationships and a fellow at the East Asian Legal Studies Program. Thank you so much for joining us, Lobsang, for this conversation. It's a very important one, given what is happening in China these days and the impact it has globally, really. So thank you for this.
Thank you. So good to see you, Priya.
Good to see you again. Yes. We are talking at a time when the 20th Party Congress is all set to rubber stamp Xi Jinping as for an unprecedented third term. How worried are you about this?
Well, I think it's given that, he will get a third term. Unfortunately, since President Xi Jinping took over, situation in China in general and Tibet in particular with Xinjiang and other quote-unquote minority areas have seen repression, which is unprecedented. So that way, we are worried that the repressive policies will continue, and assimilation drive to make Tibet into China, Tibetans into Chinese, and what they call Sinicization of Buddhism will continue. So that's worrisome.
I've heard you at the Atlantic Council also talking about the impact on religious freedom, not just, it's Buddhism, whether it is churches, whether it is even against the Islamic religion. So there is a real fear that the religion will be only one God, that is Xi Jinping. Churches are being torn down, Bible quotes are being eradicated with quotes of Xi Jinping. So is China heading towards an authoritarian, where there's just one religion?
Well, obviously, their religion is communism, which essentially, does not believe in religion at all, and in fact sees religion as what Mao Zedong says, an opium of the masses. So there is fundamental contradiction between communism and Buddhism and religion in general. So definitely, they want to see the superiority of communism and Communist Party over all religions and religious institutions. So that way, we fear that the clampdown will continue, and the denial of religious freedom to Tibetan people and other people in China will be unfortunately diluted and suppressed.
How different, you've mentioned Mao, how different is Xi Jinping's new cultural revolution from Mao's cultural revolution?
Well, Mao's cultural revolution, there was physical destruction of all the religious institutions and artifacts, and statues of Buddhas were all destroyed. In fact, we lost about 75% of what we have built over the last 1,000+ years in Tibet, during Mao Zedong's time. Even though the physical destruction is little less, but you can see telltale signs that physical destruction will also happen. In places in Tibet, the statue of Buddha, 99 feet high, statue of future Buddha, Maitreya, and the prayer wheels are all being destroyed now, And we know from, several years ago, the biggest Buddhist institution called Sartha Monastery was reduced to half. And then the Yalungar nunnery was also again demolished, reduced to half. So those kinds of physical destructions are also taking place, but this time it's more systematic and sinister. That means in all the monasteries, they have what they call democratic management committee of Communist Party members, essentially controlling the monastery, who goes in, who goes out, how many monks and nuns can practice, not practice. So all this control that they impose, and reduction in enrollment in monastic institutions, particularly not allowing monasteries to run, schools to teach Tibetan culture and Tibetan language to children, are again, unknown or unseen before.
These are all part of what we're hearing are these 41 rules that have come up, the control measures for religious groups, what you are talking about.
Oh, yes. I mean, there are a lot of guidelines. And one is obviously what they call document number 5, which on the one hand is laughable. That is, if there is a reincarnated Lama, has to be registered and approved by the Communist Party of China. So can you imagine a Communist Party of China, which says religion is poison, is selecting and approving the reincarnated lamas, and they want to do the same thing with the bishops and rabbis and other areas. So that's control number 1. And number 2 is who goes in and out of the monastery. And number 3 is what is taught in. This is very dangerous because Sinicization of Buddhism means when you teach Buddhism in Tibet, there is a national element to it because a lot of scholars work so hard to bring Buddhism from India to Tibet, right? Then all these scholars work very, very hard to bring. And when you read those stories, it's very moving. But now you want to translate all those Buddhist texts into Chinese, and you want the Tibetan Lamas to teach Buddhism in Chinese language. The scriptures will only in Chinese, devoid of all the national elements, So those kinds of rules will have damaging impact on practice of Buddhism in Tibet.
We described you as the political heir to Dalai Lama, but roughly, what does your legacy translate to on ground? How do you interpret your legacy as?
Well, in short, when in 2011, when I got elected, I was the youngest and exiled born, and His Holiness Dalai Lama decided to devolve all his political authority, essentially separate the church and the state, So at that time, the Tibetans, especially the elder generation, were very worried as to whether we can carry on the responsibilities of all the political and administrative matters that was so ably guided and led by His Holiness Dalai Lama. But in the last 10 years, and I got re-elected in 2016. So what I've done is I made the transition from this historic, the body or the leadership, which was solely led by His Holiness Dalai Lama, to a secular layperson led, administrative matters. So now Tibetans are not just comfortable, so used to it, we are almost like, normal political affairs and intrigues also take place in the Tibetan society. That means the transition has gone on quite smoothly because there was His Holiness, wish. That's what he said is my long, desired wish that there be a full-fledged democracy in exile. And, we can contrast that with the Communist Party system in Tibet. And also, get along and go along with the democratic, countries and system in the world. That we have done it.
And what about Dalai Lama's heir? The Panchen Lama has been missing since '95. So, what is the latest on that?
Now, unfortunately, it's a mystery that Panchen Lama has disappeared for more than 25 years. And no one knows, right? I mean, we have, intelligence of America and Russia and India, everybody included. But how can one person disappear for more than 25 years and not know? So that, that the Chinese government has essentially make Gendun Chökyi Nyima disappear for more than 2 decades is puzzling. And it's sad, but that also shows that the paranoia or the nervousness on the part of the Chinese government that they would, make a boy at the age of 5 disappear and not be seen around to his followers in Tibet. And as far as Dalai Lama's reincarnation is concerned, Chinese government has no business whatsoever in interfering with the reincarnation of Dalai Lama. It is for His Holiness Dalai Lama to decide. After all, it is his reincarnation. No one has any business, So that I think we must send a very clear message to Beijing in particular, and the whole world should know this is the decision of the Dalai Lama and no one else.
That is always been your stand consistently. But Chinese have a way of, you use that phrase and I really liked it, elite co-opting the elite, basically trying to change mindsets by working on the intelligentsia, the religious leaders and the journalists and other opinion makers. So how worried are you, and how they've been pretty successful in a lot of countries?
Well, they will try. Obviously, China is a manufacturing hub. They make a lot of duplicates. But when it comes to His Holiness Dalai Lama and whatever the Chinese government do, it will always be a duplicate, a poor duplicate. Original will be with His Holiness Dalai Lama because he is the original Dalai Lama and he decides what happens to his reincarnation. And that decision will be followed by Tibetans inside and outside Tibet, Buddhists around the world, and I think people around the world will also follow because it is for His Holiness Dalai Lama to decide. He says, it's my decision to come back, and this is how I'm going to come back. Who can dispute with that? So original will always be original.
No cheap Chinese duplicate, as you said. You also talked about how the world should look at what China is doing to Tibet and learn lessons from it. Can you explain that statement, expand on it?
Yes, Tibet is patient zero. All the the policies that you see now, the Communist Party's tentacles are everywhere in the whole world. So wherever I go, whether it's Italy or Brussels or Washington, D.C., I always say the same thing. You must study Tibet very, very properly. That's the blueprint that they are implementing everywhere, whether it's Africa, Latin America, or in Asia. So elite co-optation. That's number one. For example, they try to get politicians, obviously business people, intellectuals, journalists. You just look at that. That's what they did in Tibet. So when Chinese army invaded Tibet, some of our elite moved, and that's what you see all over the world. So Tibet has been patient. Tibet, you understand the functions, the what you call mechanism of the Chinese government.
Which are the other potential Tibets? You mentioned Nepal, Sri Lanka is a case in point also, I guess.
I didn't get that
Which
point.
are the other potential Tibets, according to you, that countries that should be worried?
Well, ideologically, I think, China comes with a different ideology, different mindset, more like autocratic single party rule, which is undemocratic, right? And the technology, the AI and the algorithm that they come up with is very controlling. The surveillance system, which is implemented in China, where you have social credit system, all the data is collected and monitored. Now it's being exported to different countries around the world, and many in the Middle East and many in Africa. They like both the what you call party system or the government system and the surveillance system so that they can control people, So this, I think, it's quite, disturbing for the whole world. I mean, so that's why I always say it's, conflict between autocratic system and democratic system. And we have no option but for democracy to prevail, because democracy is obviously, with all its flaws, is for the people, by the people, and of the people. So that's why what you need is basic freedom for everybody in the whole world. And with the one-party system, no matter what you say, you deny that basic freedom to your citizens. That's what we should watch out for.
And there's a lesson there for more countries than just China. But I'm going to take a break and come back. And I want to ask you about China's role in Sri Lanka. How much do you blame China for what is happening in Sri Lanka? Just after the short break. Hello and welcome back to Cover Story. We are in conversation with Lobsang Sangye. We are talking to him about China, Tibet, and the immediate South Asian neighborhood. Sangye, we were talking about China's role in Sri Lanka. How much do you blame China for the collapse of the Sri Lankan economy?
Well, I don't know whether there is direct for the immediate collapse of the government in Sri Lanka, because with all this inflation and lack of foreign reserve to buy gas and other food items for Sri Lankan citizens. But obviously, the Rajapaksas, the brothers were quite close to the Chinese government, I mean,
but they lulled into a false sense of security that the safety net would be provided by China, and that didn't happen.
So that's true. So in that sense, yes, I think they relied, like Sri Lanka, there are many other countries, which are promised lots of aid and obviously lots of help by the Chinese government. When actually, push comes to shove, when Sri Lanka was facing such major crisis, the government always collapsed. The whole system was collapsing. Chinese government did not or could not come to the rescue. So that's a lesson that other countries also should learn. So obviously there is a link, because Sri Lanka, even though it is in the domain of South Asia, in the last decade or so, decided to lean heavily towards China. And in that sense, indirectly, the consequences that you see is obviously when you heavily lean towards one country, and then the consequences that you face should be attributed to that partner as well. So having said that, other countries should also realize, and we also had some challenges in Pakistan as well, which is what they call, weather-tested friend, and all kinds of terms are used to show how close they are. But then
against one enemy.
Yes, and then when there's when there was a problem and continues to have problem in Pakistan as well, the weather-tested friend didn't come to rescue to the extent that they promised and that the Pakistanis and Sri Lankans were expecting.
Well, don't forget Russia, another friend that I don't know whether how much support Chinese is supporting the Russia on the Ukraine invasion.
Now, ideologically, yes, because just before the invasion of Ukraine in February, they signed this major, what they called most trusted, friendship agreement / treaty between China and Russia. And as soon 3 days after the Olympics was over in Beijing, invasion took place. So a lot of coincidences, right? So again, invasion of Ukraine is another example where now European countries are also realizing, through relying too much on Russia's gas and oil. Now, when you rely so much on an authoritarian government, you think you can get by or get along doing business with authoritarian government while ignoring or at least sidelining, values like democracy and human rights and freedom. Then that's the price you pay, right? So now Europeans have realized that, and Europeans are more or less united now when it comes to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Similarly, I think we all should look at China when it comes to Taiwan, when it comes to border areas of India, that what could happen in the future.
But the larger war, all these are battlefields, really. The larger war, the next big war is US and China. How do you see that playing out?
Obviously, China wants to be number one. To become number one, you have to replace the present number one. That is US. Now, in Washington, D.C., also in US, there's a realization that China is not just a competition, but also a rival. So now, from military point of view, security point of view, now economy point of view, they just about to pass this bipartisan bill on semiconductor and all kinds of manufacturing, the materials that America needs, where China is ahead. So in every sense of the word, Washington is preparing to compete and deal with China. And then now there is growing realization in Europe, and I'm happy to see there is growing realization in India as well, that ultimately competition is with China, because they want to be number one in the world, means they want to be number one in Asia, They want to be number one in Europe, and they want to be number one in the whole world.
Uh, Finally, how do you see India positioning itself in Asia, vis-a-vis China and Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka? Just as a, you're also an expert on strategic affairs. So if you put that hat on.
Well, thank you for that, what do you call, title, but I don't think I'm an expert per se. But
I shared a panel with you, so I know.
Yes, I think, yeah. A few months ago, we were in Bangalore together. So yes, again, as I said, Tibet was patient patient zero. When Tibet was occupied, the Chinese leaders made it very clear. Tibet is the palm, and then they will go after five fingers, right? Nepal, Ladakh, Bhutan, Sikkim, and Arunachal Pradesh. So that is happening. And now India should realize that, right? And geopolitically, if you look at all the neighboring countries, China is everywhere, So having said that, now there's the Indian model and Chinese model. Indian model is democracy, development with democracy. China's model is development without democracy. So, so this model also in Asia are contested. And many countries and presently follow or prefer development with democracy, the Indian model, So now there is development without democracy. So this challenge also should be taken very seriously by India and say, and believing so, that we will lead Asia, with our model, development with democracy.
My final question to you, you've also been a very pertinent point. You mentioned that the Simla agreement was also between India and Tibet. So, in terms of that India should also, one way of resolving the border issues, having the cause of Tibet, having Tibet as a buffer zone. So the standoff between India and China, apart from this, what can India do? Who will be its allies in terms of the standoff?
I know, yeah, one similar agreement between, British India and Pakistan is very well known. But other similar agreements, with Tibet and, British India should be recognized and, given full respect because in 1914, British India and Tibet signed this similar agreement, right? And on the sideline, they also signed the border demarcation called McMahon Line, which demarcated border between India and Tibet, particularly in Arunachal Pradesh. So now India prefers McMahon Line as the border, but India doesn't say border is with Tibet, but says is border with China, all right? Now, when you say you have a border with China, when Chinese troops come to Doklam or Galwan, and everybody acts surprised and say, why are they there? If you call your border with China, Chinese troops will come to the border, and in fact, they will make inroads, right? Now, if you have always called the border with India and Tibet, beginning with the similar agreement of 1914 and McMahon Line, then you can always question, why are you here? This is border of Tibet, not China's, right? So the argument and the document, the agreement we signed in 1914 in Simla is very, very, very important. So I think we can discuss a lot on this, but I think recognizing that agreement is very important. In fact, in 1940s, when Chinese troops were coming to Tibet, then Minister Shagapa, in fact, wrote a personal note to Nehru saying, at the moment, in the Arunachal area, we have barely 50 or 80 troops guarding the border. Now, if Chinese troops come and occupy Tibet, this will not be enough. India will pay a major price. Now you have 50,000 troops at Galwan Valley, right? From 50 troops, Tibetan troops. Now you have 50,000 from Indian side and 50,000 from Chinese side. And at Doklam also similar numbers are there. So you can imagine where it was such a peaceful border where 50 troops was enough. Now 50,000 is not enough. So these are the lessons one must learn. And similar agreement of 1914 is very, very important.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sangye. And I think anybody who's hearing this conversation will agree with me when I call him an articulate defender of Tibet rights and an expert on Southeast Asian politics. But thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you, Priya. So good to see you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.